sometimes you'll see compound inequalities that you need to graph, inequalities that have an and or an or. In this case, you don't see the word and, but when you see these inequalities that are sort of three pieces sort of merged together, that's typically going to be an and inequality, and the graph for that's going to look a certain way. So what I like to do with the and, because they're a bit tricky at first, like I've already done, I like to draw these lines to separate the three parts of this inequality. And as we do with equations, and we thought whatever you do to one side, make sure you do to the other side. In this case, just think whatever I do to one part, I need to make sure I do to all three parts, and you should be okay. So let's start looking in the middle and do what we would normally do with solving for x. So I want to start by adding 10. Now just make sure you add 10 there, and add 10 there, and add 10 there, added to all three parts. -4 and 10 gets us a 6. Again, make sure those inequality symbols don't magically change directions on you unless you ever multiply or divide by a negative, and then flip those symbols around. And then less than or equal to 24. I want to get rid of that 6 that the x is attached to, so since they're being multiplied, I'll divide to undo it. Again, just make sure you divide by 6 in all three parts. So divide by 6 in the middle, divide by 6 on the right, and divide by 6 on the left. So I end up with 1 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 4. That's my answer. To see what that looks like as a graph, I'm going to go ahead and make my number line. I now need two numbers on my number line, in this case a 1 and a 4. If you want to include other numbers, go for it. Make sure your smaller number is always on the left and your bigger number is always on the right, because that's how the number line works. At 1, I'm not allowed to be equal to 1, so I have to have an open circle. I am allowed to be equal to 4, so I'm going to put a filled in circle right there. 4 would be a solution. If you're having a hard time figuring out how this graph is going to look, what I encourage people to do is just look at part of your inequality at a time. So if I just look at this part of the inequality only, that says to shade where x is, so shade all the numbers that are less than 4. Well, all the numbers less than 4 go in this direction, so I'm going to start shading that way. If I switch colors, look at the other part of the inequality. I'll do this part looking at that in yellow. Now just shade this part, and remember, read from the x or rewrite it if you want to see it written with the x on the left, and that says to shade where all the numbers are greater than 1. So all the numbers bigger than 1 on my number line go in this direction, and you see what happens are those two lines end up meeting, and typically that's what your and graphs are going to look like. Not always, but 99% of the time I'd say your and graphs are these two dots that connect. They sort of make this barbell type shape.